Hello, fellow solvers. This is Cog with Cog Analytics. Today we're diving into day 3 of Advent of Code. This was either a very simple problem for those of you that are familiar with Regex, and for those of you who are not, this may have been a little bit more difficult to approach. We can see that our input is a large string of characters, which seems random, but interspersed within that string are a number of multiply functions of this specific format. So we have the characters MUL, an open parenthesis, a 1 to 3 digit number, comma, another 1 to 3 digit number, and a closing parenthesis. Now, anything that does not match this exactly should not be counted. We can see here some examples of that. So there's missing number, missing input, a missing closing parenthesis, missing multiply function, etc. So it has to look exactly like this format in order to be counted. Once we identify all such instructions, we want to perform the product of those two input numbers and then sum up all of those results in order to get our final output. And that is the answer to part 1. In part 2, we have an added twist that there are two separate instructions, the do and don't instructions, which enable and disable future multiply instructions respectively. One of the added pieces of information that is critical and may be easily missed is at the very beginning of the program, all multiply instructions are enabled. So nothing will change from part 1 until we reach our first don't. With that information, let's jump into Alteryx and take a look at the solution. We can see here a pretty simple workflow for both parts 1 and part 2. As I said, this is not very hard as long as you are familiar with the regex that's used. We can see our input is, as we described, a list of strings. Really just one string, but you can see multiple records in here because carriage returns were a part of the input. So the MVT here is the regex tool, most valuable tool for our workflow. Before we go over the actual regular expression, we can take a look and realize that the output method that we need to use is tokenize. So we want to also split to rows so that anytime that we identify this regular expression or this regular expression is matched within the string, then we want that entire value to be added to a separate record. And so what are we looking for? We want the characters MUL, followed by this escape character, which is the opening parenthesis, a 1 to 3 digit number, comma, another 1 to 3 digit number, and we'll close our parenthetical. And you can see here from the output that we've captured all the values that we would like from our input data. And we can see a number of multiply functions. At this point, we can use some more regex expressions via the regex replace function in the formula tool to identify the first and second digits, or not digits, but numbers, our first and second inputs to the multiply function and multiply them together to create a product column. And that you can see here in our output in the results pane as well. Once we have this, we have one more step to take, which is using the summarize tool to aggregate and sum up all of that data, and that gives us our final output for part 1. Part 2, very similarly, but now we want to add that extra component of two instructions, both the do function, which will have exactly as described the D and O, and then the open and closing parentheses, as well as the don't function we will search for as well, and tokenize in our output of this tool. And so you can see here now we have exactly that. We have a number of multiply instructions, we have don't instructions as well included, and do instructions. In order to actually identify how we're going to evaluate this, remember that we start with the multiply instructions enabled. And so we can evaluate this with a multi-row formula tool. So we'll create a new column, which we'll call a use flag, and we'll make it an integer type so that we can multiply as opposed to a Boolean flag. And we'll use this to multiply and come up with what our product is supposed to be. And we'll see that here, how that exactly gets implemented in a few seconds. So we first check if we're looking at the very first record, or if we find a do instruction, then we want to output the number 1. Otherwise, we want to output the number 0. And if neither of those is the case, then we want to continue with whatever existed previously. That way, if we see a don't, then we will propagate the 0 downward, and if we're after a do, then we will propagate the 1 downward. That way we enable or disable all subsequent multiply instructions as the problem stated and requires. In order to utilize that new column that we've added with the formula tool again, we have exactly the same expression as from part 1, except now we will multiply by that use flag column. So if we take a look at our current results pane, we can see the output to that. We begin With all the multiply instructions enabled, you can see a 1 and we are evaluating the product until we reach our first don't, at which point this 0 is going to be multiplied into the product and it will cancel out all the values, thus disabling the instruction. Pretty clever and smart way to do this. Very simple way as well. We don't have to filter out everything. We can just keep everything exactly the same as it was in part 1 and not have to redo our logic. And then again, you can see here the do re enables everything that comes after it. Now that we have this new product data, we can again add a summarize tool, sum over all of the results, and get our output for part 2 as well. As always, please like, subscribe, comment. Again, if you have a different approach, I'd love to hear it. If you are less familiar with Regex and would like to see a tutorial on how to get up and running on Regex within Alteryx, please let me know as well, and I'd be happy to put something together for you. Again, I hope this helps, and happy solving.